All right, you're ready to go, Nelson.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the monthly October meeting of the Land Use Landmarks and Planning Committee. My name is Nosa Rama. I'm the vice chair of this committee. Chair Villanueva could not join us tonight, although he said that he would try to call in. So we're going to start the meeting, and I'd like to thank all who were patient as it took us a little while to get here. But I'm going to start reading the ground rules so that we can move this forward. No one may speak until granted the floor. CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear, and you should find the raise hand function here. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click on the chat icon and relay your difficulty to CB11 staff. The chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information, such as an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and wait to be recognized. So the meeting is called to order. It's roughly 6:49 p.m. Thank you again for joining. And with that, I'm going to ask Angel Muscane to call the roll.
Certainly. Committee members, when I call your name, please answer present. Devin Cronshaw is excused. Kenneth Crouch.
Present.
Jessica Elliott.
Present.
Jessica Morris. Nelsa Rama.
Present.
Pardon me, I'm here.
Hi, thanks.
Yep.
Beverly Pabon. Fanny Torres. Jason Villanueva.
I'm here, Angel.
Thank you, Beverly.
Okay.
Candy Vasquez.
Here.
Thank you. You have quorum.
Thank you so much, Angel. And with that, we're going to move to the adoption of the agenda. I hope everyone at this meeting had a chance to review the agenda. If there are no questions about the agenda, we'll move forward to the adoption of committee minutes. If there are no objections to the committee minutes, then we will adopt them as stated. We're going to move on now to announcements. Are there any announcements, Jessica?
No, so I've got a question about the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I recall in our last meeting, I'm not sure if it is a point that should be amended.
Okay.
Before they're approved. I believe it was you who made a comment to the architect for the renovation on 104th Street, where we're issuing a letter of support. I believe there was a condition with that letter of support to consider keeping the ladder.
Right.
That's not noted in the minutes. I'm not sure if it is noted in our letter of support. And if you want to stick to your guns on that, if we should make it a part of the record.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your recollection. You're absolutely right. I did mention why not keep that as the community recognizes that latter. So I would like to have the minutes amended to reflect the point that Jessica brought up. And once it's amended, then if there are no other corrections, then I will put out that the minutes be amended and approved as mentioned. I don't see any other hands, so thank you, Jessica, and we will move forward with approving those minutes with the amendments and the edits as stated by Jessica. Thank you so much. The announcement is that the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for November 9th, 2022. That's towards the end, and I understand that people will be busy, but I will impress upon this committee that this committee is a very important committee for our community. So wherever possible, please note that on your calendar, and wherever you can, try to make it within at least a 15-minute. We should ideally be ready to start within 5 minutes of the meeting time, no less than 10, because there reaches a point where if we do not have a meeting started or quorum before a certain time, we would have to then adjourn this meeting, and then business of the board of committee would not be able to happen. Jessica? Morris?
Thank you, Nosa. I have, I guess it's an announcement. This would be the appropriate place to share information with fellow committee members in the public forum. I just want to share and open it up to any comments. I was invited to participate in a dialogue just this afternoon. I'm still kind of trying to understand where it came from and what it is. Invited to participate in a dialogue called the East Side Land Use Coalition across East Side community boards 6, 8, and 11. I'm not sure if there are other members of this committee or our board who are engaged in that conversation. I am happy to attend and listen to the conversation as it exists, being fairly well informed about what happens above 96th Street, east of 5th Avenue, but also wanted to make the committee aware that that was something that was going on. I'm also happy to report back any useful information that comes up, with our neighbors as it goes, and also to bring forward any standing issues that we have if that seems like a venue where useful dialogue might ensue.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. I think that, congratulations on being invited. I think that definitely if the chair of the board, Xavier Santiago, is not aware, please make him aware of that, and Chair Villanueva, and then and of course our wonderful district manager Angel Muscane, and so that then they can one, let you know if there are any other members who may be joining, and two, bring up any issues that once it's discussed, they can bring them to your attention. So that's my only comment. I don't know if Angel, you have anything to say on this?
No, I'm familiar with it.
Okay.
It's a meeting convened, but it's a group convened by Civitas. And they're like on their second or third meeting. They've just started it.
Thank you, Jessica. Are there any other announcements? Well, I don't hear any, and Angel, I'm assuming that the committee meeting is the only announcement, but if you have another announcement, please feel free to jump in. If not,
I do not.
all right, then we're going to continue with the agenda. Are there any informational updates? All right, so now we're going to move along to our presentations and discussions. The first presentation we will have is from George James. It's an informational update regarding the first public information session on the City of Yes proposed zoning text amendments. We're very fortunate as always to have George James, our land use consultant, educate us and give us materials to help us always understand. So George, you have the floor.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Yes. Okay. Okay, great. I assume you can see this. So,
Yeah.
okay, so the city is planning on proposing 3 major zoning text amendments. And so today I'm going to go through what they are, what they're talking about, try to explain them, give a little bit of editorializing on my part. But first I want to start out with, for some of the members, is what does that mean? What is a zoning text amendment? A zoning text amendment is really basically what it says is, we have zoning text. So we have zoning maps, and then we have zoning text, the words that go along with the maps. And what we do from time to time is we make edits to the zoning text to reflect, changes in the world and how we want the zoning to work. And so you'll end up with, at some point in the future, zoning text with cross-outs and add-ins. And these things can be very heavy, meaning zoning text is hard to read. It's really important, but sometimes it's not very clear what the change is going to do and why it's important. And so it's good that they're getting started early, because this is it's going to take a little bit to digest all of this. So the 3 amendments have been given the following names: zoning for zero carbon, and that is expected to be referred out in early 2023. Zoning for economic opportunity, which will come later, and then zoning for housing opportunity. There was an information session that was held on October 17th. That was Monday. I was there. I've been told that there will be several additional public information sessions held over the next few months where they discuss these things. And the city has said that they want input. And I understand that they'll be coming, DCP will be coming to the community board at some point, or at least that's what I've been told, to describe these things before it is referred out, which is always welcome. The more lead time and the more time you have to chew on these things, the better. And so, if they want input, we should take them at their word, and the community board should consider providing input. Okay, so I'm going to go through the 3 of them one at a time. Zoning for zero carbon deals with these 3 areas: energy, buildings, and parking. And I'll go into the one at a time. So, solar panels in New York City. It's an issue. You can put them on your rooftop, but there are rules. Right now, zoning prohibits solar in the areas marked in red. Even in the areas outside marked in red, you can't cover the entire thing with solar panels. The total area that can be covered is only the area marked in green. And then finally, if the building is already at maximum building height, the panels can only be 18 inches tall. So, it's a limitation. If you want to max out solar panel coverage, you can't under the current rules. You can only essentially put them on the green area. And so the zoning text amendment is to try to look at how do you change the zoning text to allow for more space for panels. And it's not all zoning regulations. Part of it is the fire department. They want to be able to have firefighters walk on the roof without obstructions. And so that means you can't put a solar panel where you want to have a firefighter be able to walk. And so what the idea is that you can develop solar canopies that would sit on top of the roof. And something like this, which is a real building in Brooklyn with a solar canopy. This canopy is set back, but it otherwise is similar to what they're proposing. The solar canopies would be allowed to permit maximum building heights as a permitted obstruction. And the idea is that the roof would still be usable by people or the FDNY or energy storage systems and or other building mechanicals. So it'd still be usable, but you would still be able to get maximum solar coverage. Now, currently, permitted obstructions like rooftop bulkheads, they're limited, right? So typically, if the height limit of the building is less than 120 feet, the obstruction is normally something like this, which is 25 feet tall, no more than 25% of the building footprint. If in higher density districts, it can be bigger, they can be up to 40 feet. But you know, if you have a solar canopy that's 20 feet tall or whatever it's going to be, because it hasn't been determined yet, it is going to be a substantial increase in the mass of the building because these things are solid when viewed from below, even though they're open on the sides. Anyway, that's something that I think that everybody wants more solar, but there's going to be a change in how buildings look if this goes forward. All right, so on to the next part, which is buildings. So many buildings have been constructed with poor materials, essentially that leak. Something like this right here is essentially a very thin wall. It's not very energy efficient, and facade retrofits can make them more efficient. Oftentimes, wall thickness, though, counts as floor area. So if you want to make your walls thicker, it makes it impossible if you're already maxed out on building floor area to do that. And so what this in theory is supposed to amend the zoning to allow you to discount some wall thicknesses as floor area. Now, it's very important to say, I think, that in 2012, we did just that. There's a zoning text amendment called Zone Green, which allows you to exempt a portion of your wall as non-zoning floor area. So I think this is just going to be a tweak. It's not, like looking at the details, see what works and what doesn't work. It's not a new thing, is what I'm saying. We already do this, but the details are unclear, and we probably should try to get some clarification. Locations for commercial electric vehicle charging stations are limited. They are use group 7. They're not allowed in C1 districts. They're practically limited, and the concept would be to allow them more widely. What does more widely mean? It wasn't stated, but that might mean allowing commercial recharging stations in residential garages. I'm not sure, but essentially the city wants to try to get these needed facilities into more places, and it's exploring ways of doing that. Okay, that's the highlights of zoning for zero carbon, which is going to be the first thing that is released. The second one is zoning for economic opportunity. And that is going to focus on changes in how we classify different uses and where we allow different uses. And it has the following goals: easier business expansion, streamlined regulations, and revisions to the zoning regulations to support maker and manufacturing, retail, and clean production space. So we should talk a little bit before we get into this and how we deal with uses in zoning now. So every use in New York City is given a use group that ranges between 1 and 18. Residential is 1 and 2, community facility is 3 and 4. You have commercial between 5, which is hotels, to 15, which is amusement parks. General service, which is essentially automobile related stuff, sales and service stations. And then you have manufacturing, a kind of lighter and a heavier manufacturing. And each of these uses are allowed in only certain districts, right? We don't allow you to put an apartment building, We don't allow an apartment building in a manufacturing district, for instance, or a new apartment building in a manufacturing district. You will see that the C1 districts only allowed 2 commercial use groups. C1 is the most common commercial district, right? So the most common commercial district allows only 2 of the 11 use groups that are commercial. And you'll see a lot of, there are gaps in here. And when you get into details, you'll see that there's, a lot of limitations on where you can put certain uses. Okay, that's the way existing zoning works now. And so the way we kind of categorize these uses, it can create conflicts for when uses don't fit into a neat little box. All right, so examples, and some of these were given by city planning on Monday. A bakery, for instance, the way it works is that a local bakery, you can make your goods in your bakery as long as your production area is under 750 square feet. And if you have a bigger local bakery, like if you want to expand, like say from this bakery into this empty storefront, sometimes you can't do that because you go from a retail use group 6 establishment to a manufacturing use group 17 establishment, right? Where is that line drawn? And right now, zoning says 750 square feet. If your production area is over that, you can't locate in commercial districts. Bike stores are similar. You can have a bike store in basically any commercial district or almost any commercial district, but you can't have bike rental or repair because of zoning, because that would be a different use group. And other uses are likewise affected. Jewelry can be sold, but not made in most of the commercial districts. And the goal of zoning for economic opportunity is to allow for a wider mix of uses in commercial districts, and allowing small manufacturing, repair, and service along with your more typical storefronts. And let's think about that in East Harlem. So, well, actually, before we do that, let's talk about larger uses. So, large stores like department stores, like the Target in East River Plaza. You have a Target over here. It's in a C4 district. Large stores like a Target or any kind of big box stores, they can't go in most of the commercial districts you have. So in East Harlem, you have C1 districts, you have C2 districts, all these little red areas, red boxes, which are commercial overlays. Large stores can't go in there. They have to go in either C4 or C6 or these M districts. And so when you look at the size of East Harlem, they're really limited in where they can locate. And you see, a lot of these big stores, they are doing really unusual things like putting massive areas underground. So like you'll see the Target at 86th Street on Lexington Avenue line is mostly underground, because that way that underground space doesn't count for the floor area limitation. And so they have real trouble locating. Large restaurants and restaurants that have dancing of any size are very limited in where they can locate as of right. You can get a special permit and put them in different places, but as of right in East Harlem, you'd be only talking about the C6 district up here, over here, and in the M districts. I mean, that's it. And there's not very many locations for that kind of use, even though the city did modify the cabaret rules to allow for these restaurants. The zoning rules are very restrictive. And I expect that this amendment is going to allow these types of uses in more areas than they're allowed now. I don't know exactly where, I don't know exactly how, but I expect that the whole idea is to allow for more flexibility in uses and where they go. And so, right now you end up with, your local commercials on your avenues, right? But you have, a lot of uses that can't go here, and they're really forced to the upper part of 3rd Avenue, 125th Street, and you know, this area between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. Okay. Also, under economic opportunity, parking and loading requirements. So parking and loading requirements, they vary according to use. Like the number of loading berths you need varies by what you're doing in the building. So here's a building, like if it was being used for offices, this one loading berth may be fine. But what happens if the owner wants to tenant it with a manufacturer? And the manufacturer only needs the one loading berth, but zoning may require more. And that's a problem with zoning, is that it's a blunt tool. It has requirements and it goes according to use, but what the details of the use are doesn't matter. And that's a problem, because it really should be a kind of performance-based system. If the use requires it, meaning like the specific use, meaning it's like producing a lot of materials, comes in and out, well, then that's fine. But if it doesn't, then it probably shouldn't need it. And zoning doesn't have too many performance-based requirements like that. You either have it or you don't. And parking is very similar. The parking requirements vary by use, making tenanting difficult. And the proposal is supposed to change how loading berths, parking is, how they're all calculated. And I'm not exactly sure how. We don't know, but they're going to be made more flexible to allow, and less rigid, which, you know, especially for the loading and manufacturing uses, they come straight out of 1961, and it's a different world today. Okay, so, you know, editorially speaking, uses and use groups in zoning it's a hot mess. There have been really no major updates to the 50 pages worth of different uses in the zoning resolution for 30 years. And you'll see uses in there that are kind of ridiculous, like typewriter repair. They reflect the world of 1961. Yes, there have been some minor updates, but basically it is not very good. And it needs to be fixed. And it sounds like zoning for economic opportunity is going to do a heavy lift and try to make these changes that really need to be done. And I think, you know, I call this low-hanging fruit, meaning like it's a problem that we all know has been there. And it's gonna, but the fact that they've decided to do it now is like it's a good thing. But, you know, the details will matter, and we don't have much in the way of details right now. Okay, the last one, zoning for housing opportunity. This one is likely to be the biggest change. And the idea of this one, it will be to increase density everywhere when there's affordable housing involved. Reduce parking requirements, reduce or remove the minimum unit size, make it easier to convert offices and hotels to housing units and other non-residential buildings to housing units. And there'll also be changes in low density areas that don't exist in East Harlem, and I'm not going to talk about. Okay, so increasing density everywhere for affordable housing. Currently, there are 3 major zoning tools for affordable housing. You have the mandatory inclusionary housing bonus, and then the affordable independent residence for seniors, or AIRS program. Okay, mandatory inclusionary housing, you know about. This is something that there's an upzoning in an area. Mandatory inclusionary housing attaches. It's essentially, you have to put in some amount of affordable housing for an increase in residential density. It's a requirement that runs with the land. The inclusionary housing bonus was an optional bonus that was developed and mapped during the Bloomberg administration. It only exists in certain areas. In East Harlem along 125th Street is mostly, or much of it is a optional inclusionary housing bonus area. And then AIRS, which is a program that's designed for seniors, affordable senior housing. The first two are mapped, meaning you've got to actually change the zoning map to say where that they apply. But errors, you never had to map errors, right? This is something that you could do in most zoning districts. And the idea of that was if you provided some amount of affordable independent residences for seniors, you could get more density and build a bigger building. It was adopted in 2016 as a part of zoning for quality and affordability. But it has a lot of promise, I think. And the idea for zoning for housing opportunity would be to apply the heirs regulations to all buildings with a minimum amount of affordable housing at the developer's option. This is my understanding of it. And it actually makes a fair amount of sense. This could, I mean, in theory, it could replace new large-scale MIH areas, as I haven't been hearing much about neighborhood rezonings. That was a more of a de Blasio focus. This administration doesn't seem to be focusing so much on neighborhood rezonings. But I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have to rely on neighborhood rezonings though, because if you have heirs or a program that matches heirs, it applies everywhere. You would just be responsive to applicants that come in with affordable housing in their buildings. Now, it's important to note that heirs was suspended in 2021 due to fair housing concerns. And also HPD complained that the average AMI level was high at 80%. They thought it was too high for affordable senior apartments. But this may be an opportunity for DCP to fix errors by expanding it to all affordable housing and not just senior housing. But this is going to require a significant change to zoning, and it's going to, I think it's going to be a challenge in the environmental reviews as well. It's important to say that other jurisdictions require affordable housing in all new buildings without any bonus or increase in FAR at all, right? This is something that we've stayed away from in New York City, but if you're trying to build an apartment building in Westchester County, you are required to put 10% of the building into affordable housing. It's not a very big requirement, but you don't have an option. Other jurisdictions do the same thing do the same thing. We don't do that in New York City outside of the mandatory inclusionary housing areas, which are mapped. But it's something that, maybe errors shouldn't be at the developer's option. Maybe it should be something that has some sort of mandatory component to it. My point being is that should NYC be doing something similar? And if you think so, now is the time to start weighing in, right? When you start touching the way zoning works, if it's not working the way you want it, well, then now it's time to start weighing in. Parking requirements. The parking requirements can get in the way of new development. These are two East Harlem buildings. What they did to address their issues, they didn't want to provide parking because it's expensive. What they did was they cut off a chunk of their lot. This one was in fact very small, only 3 inches wide, so that they could waive out of the parking requirement. It's very clever. And so, you would rather see your land developed as opposed to just left empty. And there could be ways of changing the parking requirements so it doesn't impede new development. Other buildings, not these, they produce fewer units or smaller buildings to avoid the parking requirements so they could waive out of them. Currently, new buildings in East Harlem must have an average unit size of greater than 680 square feet. That's in the zoning. And if a developer wants to make a building of studios, they can't, unless they're very, very large studios. If small units are desired in a building, they must be balanced with larger units so that the average is not less than 680 square feet. The city is looking, they want to remove this or lower this requirement, either remove or lower this requirement. I'm not sure which one. In East Harlem today, when there are new buildings going in, the average unit size is low. It's usually, at 680 or 750 or somewhere in that range, meaning the units that are going in here on non-HPD subsidized buildings tend to be smaller. And it's conceivable that if this number was lessened, that it would get even smaller still. Now, other neighborhoods, like they don't have a problem here. They are having buildings that put in 1,000 feet or 1,500 square feet per unit. And maybe this isn't even a problem in East Harlem. It's just the way it is right now, is that the units tend to be smaller, and if this change goes into effect, they may get smaller still. And the thinking behind this, when it was put into place, is that New York City is full of tiny tenement apartments. We know this. Large apartments, they are relatively scarce. They're comparatively scarce. And the idea was that you require larger units to balance out all of the tiny existing tenement units. But at some point you have to say, is it still necessary? And it's good to be revisiting this, though I should acknowledge that in 2016, some of the higher density districts were lowered from the 750 range to 680. So the city, DCP, has been tweaking this number already relatively recently. And the question is what is the right size? I don't know. And that's something, like, if you have an opinion, something that you should all weigh in on. Okay, zoning currently allows some areas to easily convert non-residential buildings into residential buildings, but it doesn't allow other areas. And CB11 doesn't qualify for this section of the zoning resolution. And this section of the zoning resolution really applies in Lower Manhattan, where there are a lot of old, high coverage manufacturing and commercial buildings. And the idea was that they didn't want all these old historic buildings to be demolished because they were obsolete. They wanted them to be used for something that people wanted, which was housing. Problem is, of course, is that these are sometimes have very deep floor plates, and so the windows and light and air are bad. And so they had to change the rules to essentially allow these buildings to be converted. And the idea behind this, as I understand it, is to expand those rules, modify and expand those rules so that they apply in more places than they do now. And the idea would be is that you could have some of these buildings which aren't thriving as commercial or manufacturing buildings be converted into residential buildings. And the question is that okay? What about buildings that are difficult to get permits for as a new residential building, but you could do a commercial building and then shortly thereafter convert it into residential units. That's something that could happen. And how do you develop zoning to prevent something like that from happening? Okay, that's it. Those are the 3 zoning text amendments, that, or at least that's what I have right now. There are public information sessions that are ongoing. Again, there was one on the 17th. There'll be one coming up soon. My opinion is that they are informative, but it's also kind of a sales pitch with a lot of limited information on the details. It will all need to be examined more carefully. Community boards are being encouraged to develop recommendations on issues, things that they think are important, and bring them to DCP as soon as possible. I would say it's not necessarily even just commenting on what they're proposing. If you have your own ideas, if you know people in the neighborhood who are having trouble, especially commercial tenants or owners, people who have trouble tenanting their building because of zoning rules, well, let's talk to them and let's get a recommendation in. Let's be proactive. they're saying, meaning DCP is saying that they want these sorts of comments. Let's take them at their word. During the last major zoning text amendment in 2016, this community board set up a task force of interested members that wanted to dig into the details. I don't know if that's going to be necessary here. It may be, it may not be. But you know, these changes are going to shape the city. Okay, and then finally, there's just for a minute, I want to talk about blast, and it's unrelated to zoning or the zoning text amendments, but they are talking about blast. What is that? Building and Land Use Approval Streamlining Task Force. This is part of Mayor Adams' City of Yes and getting stuff done. And the idea is that there's a task force that's been set up or is being set up to come up with recommendations to make building approvals easier, to essentially streamline the land use process, to make it faster to get approvals and zoning changes. Now, the role of the community boards and land use is part of the blast discussion. It's been said already. Now, a group called the Citizens Budget Committee has proposed changes to the community board's role in the process by moving your review out of ULURP and combining it with the borough president's review. The idea would be is that you would be earlier in the process. You wouldn't be reviewing a certified land use application like you do now, but your comment period would be during the environmental review phase. If you have a full EIS, there's a scoping session that happens. I'm imagining, it wasn't very specific, I would be imagining it would happen around that time when you have a scope and a description of the process or a description of the project. And there's some logic to this. An earlier review provides more opportunity for meaningful changes in a project. If you're able to comment before it's fully baked, you're more likely to get changes. Nevertheless, I expect that such a change would diminish the role of the community board and the borough president in the process. Right now, they are part of the process, and moving them to much before when the decisions are being made by the city planning commission and city council, you know, I think that would diminish the comments, or it could diminish the comments. But you know, that would require changing the charter, so it would not be easy, but it would be possible. And my recommendation to folks in the community board and who are interested in land use issues, you should be paying attention to blast. You should know who's sitting on it. You should be reading their recommendations and commenting on them if you don't agree. All right, that's what I got. If there's questions, I'd be happy to go over them.
Thank you, George, for that wonderful in-depth presentation. I'm going to have to read it again
Sure.
to make sure that I understood all the general points and the fine points. And I know that Jessica Elliott has had a question because she's had her hand up
Oh, goodness.
for the latter part of your presentation. So Jessica, go on.
Thank you. And thank you, George, for all of these great presentations. I just have one quick comment and then two questions.
Yeah.
The blast, just talking about having moving the CB's role earlier in the process. To me, I feel like, most things come to us too late and there's not, an ability to make, changes that would be, great for the project and the community early enough. So I think, in my mind, it would be great to have earlier input, but I think a lot of things happen over the design process that change what is eventually built. So I feel like it would be great to have that earlier contact, but then we also need some sort of checkpoint later on. And then my two questions are, do we know who's sitting on the blast task force, and the AIRS requirement, sort of replacing our mandatory inclusionary housing? Do we know if that would be more or less, or do we just not know what that impact would be?
Okay, so to answer the question on blast, I have no idea. I have no idea who's sitting on that task force. you all are a lot more politically connected than I am, so you may know, or at least the chair might. I don't know these things, and no one who I know for a fact is on it. So I can't comment on that. And regarding your second question was, about heirs. You know, it's right now the heirs program is optional. Right, that's the big change, is that MIH is mandatory. You got to do it, right? Heirs is optional, but in terms of the raw numbers, they're comparable. Heirs is, I think, a little less in terms of the requirements. But remember, MIH, you have different tiers and different amounts depending on AMI served. But they're roughly comparable. Let's put it that way.
So basically, it wouldn't necessarily be mandatory anymore, and it might be less.
Let me clarify, is that no one's taken away MIH, right? The MIH is staying, or at least no one suggested that. The idea is, as an affordable housing strategy, what happens, right? And so the Blasio administration was like, neighborhood rezoning, MIH, that's how we're going to use zoning to produce affordable housing. I haven't heard that from the Adams administration. Maybe other people have. I haven't heard that being carried forward. But I find this solution kind of exciting, because even though heirs right now is not mandatory, it applies basically everywhere, right? You don't have to map it. There's like, it's something that I think it removes a big impediment in terms of getting affordable housing permitted, if you do it this way and if you do it right. Now, in terms of your comment, whether it's mandatory or not, I mean, I think that's an open question, and I think that's something that the community board should weigh in on, if you feel strongly. Right now, the way heirs works, it's only for seniors and it's optional. And so if they want to say, well, heirs for everybody and not optional, again, my point is that in other jurisdictions, producing affordable housing is not an option, right? You have to do it. And there's been, dozens, hundreds, I don't know how many there are. There are many jurisdictions. Again, just in Westchester County, all of the jurisdictions in Westchester County have to do it. And it's something that, if you think that, every building should have some amount of affordable housing, well, maybe this is something that you should push for in the modification of the heirs program. And remember, that's zoning for housing opportunity. That's not going to be certified until 2024. So you have a lot of time, and it's going to be complicated. It's going to be hard, and it's going to require an environmental review. But that means that you have an opportunity to shape it because you're early in the process, as you were saying.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Jessica, for your question, and George, equally thank you for your answers to those questions. Jessica Morris has had her hand up after Jessica Elliott. So Jessica, take it away.
Thank you, Nilsa. I know sometimes the Jessicas here in land use, we do a 1-2 punch, but always following a incredibly informative and proactive presentation by George. I just have a couple of comments and then maybe suggestion, and I'll also say I do know a couple of folks, colleagues who sit on the BLAST committee. One in particular, another committee and organization that I serve on, who values their members who sit on community boards. So being informed both here in contributing to the community perspective, but also taking our very specific community-based perspective relative to the ULURP conversation and putting that forward where it matters. I'm happy to make sure that that's heard informally as well as formally when we get to a clear point of position. I'll echo Jessica Elliott's comment that I think earlier in the process, community input mandated community input is beneficial. But Nilsa, I just want to acknowledge your immediate reaction, which was, you know, a little bit like this of feeling like feeling vulnerable immediately by being taken out at a certain point. And so I think that that's the challenge. If there's an opportunity to revise the process, acknowledging that ULURP doesn't necessarily work well for anyone, then how do we make sure if BLAST is just about moving fast, well, that's not going to do it. If BLAST is about making sure that the community voice in the process contributes to better outcomes, then that sounds good to me. So figuring out how to make sure that happens, I hope we can contribute there with all the experience that we've had here. George, this is a question that I want to bring up. I think zoning for zero carbon, awesome. We have a couple of great buildings in our district that have some renovations going on with some EIFs, wrappers, which are pretty excellent. And I know the Rupert Towers down in CB8 don't know what to do. They're going to be slapped with lots of fines, and we have two very prime examples of good owners doing good work. So, but what I want to bring up 2 points, and they're open questions. One, I think it's really important to engage the Public Safety and Transportation Committee, our fellow board members, around these issues of parking. The fact that mandated parking can increase the cost of construction astronomically in a way that makes building affordable housing units then prohibitive, or challenges those pro formas when we start, you know, to be able to ask for things, though at the same time acknowledging that parking is important to a large constituency in our district. So I think a communication and back and forth open discussion about why this may be a beneficial thing. It seems like the city's going whole hog on addressing parking where they can, parking and loading, which brings me to my second point, and this is encompassed in zoning for economic opportunity, is I worry with the change in big box commercial use frame and what we know about that, about the future of Third Avenue relative to the rezoning, Elevate Transit, and this overlay now that we don't quite know what we're going to get further down the line. So, you know, I think we should collectively think about that a little bit if it's a potential for concern. I know revisiting some of the conversations that are embedded in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan and make sure that these new citywide zoning text amendments don't completely obliterate some of those kind of well-intentioned, considered effects that we could easily see evaporate if we don't advocate for them, though I don't know exactly what they are yet because zoning is just a bit like that. And then maybe that's really it. So no questions, but a suggestion to work with our fellow board members, public safety, transportation, because parking is critical, and it's important to have those. Make sure everybody's on board and not sidelined.
Can I comment on the parking bit? Is that this is a specifically an East Harlem issue, is that East Harlem has a high water table. And so going down 2 floors for 2 decks of parking underground is really expensive because you have to build waterproof construction. It's prohibitive. It's a real problem just because of the nature of the area. And it's something that zoning, again, being a blunt tool, ignores that, right? It ignores the fact that that it costs a heck of a lot to put 2 stories worth of, or 2 decks worth of parking below ground in East Harlem than it does on the Upper East Side, or in Central Harlem for that matter. And it is something that requires less of a blunt tool, I guess, is you want to actually have something that works for the neighborhood, for specific neighborhoods, for specific buildings for that matter.
Just to say, when building parking costs more, and I've read some number, that gets essentially often in developer terms kind of distributed throughout in the cost of each unit. If your construction costs
Oh,
are
yeah.
higher, your unit costs are going to be higher, which means you have to get more financing to offer more affordable housing. So inadvertently driving up the kind of the cost of rent by including parking, and maybe not necessarily acknowledging that by losing that amenity in certain instances, you may be gaining affordable housing. And I just want to, my question about Third Avenue is, it really builds on a kind of a great unknown of this place between the elevate transit condition of adding more between what will be the Second Avenue subway and what is the 6th line, plus all of these potential upzonings. That's still not something that we really totally understand. Am I wrong?
I think you're absolutely right.
Okay.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, it all calls for more planning, frankly, right? You know, we've done the neighborhood plan, but that was in 2016. You know, you got the subway coming in, you have these other changes, and you know, I think informing DCP on your opinions on these things involves really careful thought and long range thinking.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, George. Obviously, from all the points that Jessica M and Jessica E have brought up, there's going to be a lot of questions and discussions, and bringing in other board members because this is really, really important. I'm familiar with some of the construction that has happened in East Harlem, and they've had to do trade-offs where they actually do parking on the ground level as opposed to underground, because it's just so expensive to try to keep costs down. Beverly, you have a question?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, thank you. George, again, great presentation. The information that you bring in is so eye-opening, and even though I'm new to it, still kind of new to this, the complexity of zoning is really something that we really have to consider when we're trying to look at the whole picture for our community. And your presentation, and you were showing the listing of the zoning parts that they have. I didn't see anything that said MX7. Can you explain whether that was on there, or is MX7 a different type of zoning that was just used for certain areas to bring in compliance with areas that was just light manufacturing at the time, and they wanted to make housing and residential over there? Right.
So it was in the 1990s. The city developed these special districts, which we shorthand called MX districts, and essentially they are the mixing of light manufacturing M1 districts with R districts, residential districts. It's really the only place where you can put housing and light manufacturing uses together on the same zoning lot. They have a lot of rules regarding stacking, like the heaviest use needs to be on the bottom, the manufacturing use needs to be on the top, you know, on the bottom, the residential use needs to be on the top. If you have commercial, it needs to be above the manufacturing use. And so there's all these rules that go into it to keep the uses separated on the same zoning lot. But essentially they're kind of, you know, each one is its own special district, and it has you know, the MX districts have their own set of rules, but basically, in terms of uses, it allows for a lot of flexibility. And I think the goals of what you're seeing for the economic opportunity is to provide more flexibility, meaning the city likes the MX districts. When they rezoned East Harlem, in the East Harlem rezoning, there were MX districts that were mapped. The idea is that those districts provide a lot of flexibility in terms of uses, and I think that the city and DCP likes that, and so the idea is to kind of expand that flexibility into other commercial districts.
So with the MX, they would still be able to do the airs and the MIH and
So yes, you could do an errors program in an MX district. If it is one of the MX districts that were rezoned in East Harlem for the East Harlem rezoning, it has a mandatory inclusionary housing component that is attached to it. So if the developer decides to put in residential units, then a portion of those units must be affordable. But they also have the option of putting in no residential at all and just doing commercial buildings or manufacturing buildings, right? So that's the kind of, you give a lot of flexibility to the developer, and they can determine the program from a very wide range of uses.
Okay, and my last question is regarding the parking. I know that's an issue in a lot of buildings because of the cost, does whatever they can to not have to qualify for it, like the one example you just showed us where they made it a little bit smaller. Do parking always have to be below ground or ground level?
No.
Anything, can they be like above?
Yes.
On the rooftop,
yes.
like with an elevator and stuff like that, would that be an option?
Okay, so accessory parking in buildings is exempt from zoning floor area as long as it is under 23 feet in height. So if you wanted to put parking in your cellar or in your basement or in your first floor, that's fine. You can do that and still exempt that floor area from parking. If you wanted to do elevators up to 23 feet, you could do that. If you go higher than 23 feet, Beverly, you've got to start paying for that with floor area, and developers don't want to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yes, you can be above ground, but I do want to say this is that above ground parking, deadens the street, right? You very often have blank walls, right? And it's the kind of thing that from an urban design perspective, you want to try to avoid above ground parking when you can. Sometimes you can't, but it's something that you want regulations to encourage people not to be forced to put their parking on the ground floor.
But if they start with I would figure that when you said blank walls and stuff like that, it's because of the emission of the gas that comes from the cars and stuff like that. If they switch everything over to electric, would that still be an issue?
Well, there's that, but part of it is that you have cars back there as opposed to like commercial use, right? Okay. So you're not going to have show windows, for instance.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angel.
Thanks, Melissa. So I've had the opportunity to read up a little bit about some of the stuff coming out of the mayor's office with regards to the City of Yes business, and had the opportunity recently to hear a panel discussion with a number of high-ranking officials from the administration speaking about the forthcoming text amendments and kind of their overall strategy. At least at this point, they made reference to blast. I have a couple of hesitations at this point, and we'll see when more details come out. when they come out. This administration's been lax on details, in my opinion, but we'll wait. Insofar as, you know, limiting or shifting the participation of the community boards, for whatever it's worth, I would be 100% against any move to the participation of the community boards, unless it's going to be to add more opportunities for community boards to opine. Community boards already have a very limited window to opine on these projects. And by the time they come to us, they're fairly well baked. And if, you know, you have a council member that's, you know, happens to be behind that particular project and that's in conflict with the community board's position, then that project goes ahead and gets approved. So the, you know, the independence or the impact of a community board, I think, you know, very often is, you know, it's clear that it's very limited. And I think that's a problem, because when, you know, when the community board's functioning at its best, it's, you know, it is observing and collecting and putting forward, you know, observing information and putting forward recommendations that reflect the unique needs and, you know, of and requirements of their neighborhood, you know, the neighborhoods that they represent. And a lot of times when we see projects that don't reflect what our priorities are. And then we're arguing that, oh, why don't you change this whole swath of this project? Oh, it's too late, it's already baked. That's problematic. It's not problematic, it's terrible, actually. Where instead, if you would have a conversation, an honest and, you know, conversation and true partnership early on, say, hey, look, it is our goal as an administration to try to address the city's housing emergency. You know, how can we work together, community board, this and that and the other thing, to try to achieve these goals? Hell, Community Board 11 is ready to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? But we can't talk to ourselves. And talking to somebody that isn't listening isn't really a conversation. So that's problematic. Like, we have projects right now, you know, that we're anticipating certification of ULIPs for, that their unit mix doesn't reflect the needs of our district. They reflect, you know, something that makes sense on a spreadsheet, I'm sure. They're very smart people that work in these agencies, but they don't reflect the needs of our district. You know, when people call the community board office about housing, it's a mother with kids, it's a family, 95% of the time. It's very rare that I get a single person looking for an apartment. Not that they don't exist, of course they do, but they're not knocking on our door. So I can only testify to what we're hearing. And when we see these proposals and the number of family-sized units are limited or less than all these, you know, zeros and ones, I'm like, how is that reflecting the needs of a community like this? And particularly a community that has, you know, the average income, you know, the median income is quite limited. And as a result, the households in our district are not competitive on the open market, right? Less and less every day. You know, always at risk of potential displacement when, you know, rent stabilization or an extension of those kinds of protections are not, you know, on the table. So we continue to lose units. You know, we've had some, you know, lots of meaningful preservation, thank goodness, but we continue to lose. And then what's being produced, the number of units that would serve, you know, families is limited, right? So, you know, you start, you know, adding that all up, we're behind. So yes, we have new buildings and that's great. And yes, we have new units and that's great. But when you take it in the aggregate, if you average it all out, we're behind. And CB11 doesn't want to be behind. So that's why we've been making the recommendations we've been making. But the projects that keep coming to us keep coming in a way that doesn't seem to have considered the positions that, the recommendations that we've put forward. So the idea that in the interest of, you know, making the development process or the ULIP process, you know, more efficient or faster, that anything having to do with the community board would be impacted, I think is absurd. I think if you want to go talk to the Department of Buildings, you want to talk to the Department of Transportation, to the FDNY about getting you paperwork faster, or, you know, the environmental office to turn that stuff around. I imagine there are ways to, kind of reduce some of the, lead times, in that regard. But for a community board that has such a limited impact, currently to propose anything that would further limit that impact, I think it's problematic. I think it's very problematic. And on this bit about the parking, I gotta have a problem with this whole idea that we're going to, the theory is that in transit-rich areas, we're going to require less parking. Fine. The way that works, though, is that transit not only has to be present, it has to be of quality, right? You need to be, like, those trains need to be coming. Those buses need to be moving, and they're not. That's a problem. So you're selling us, like something that looks good on paper and that I think we would agree with, but you're not picking up your part of the bargain. It's also my concern with congestion pricing. Like, you need to fix those trains, right? Like, you actually have to produce in order for that model, for that theory to work. You can't just say, oh, well, you have a train right there. I'm like, yeah, I have a bus on Madison Avenue. If any of you could tell me the last time you rode the M1 bus, it is, how long did it take you? Half an hour, 40 minutes?
45 minutes, yeah.
It's incredible.
Yes.
It's incredible, and it's been like that the whole time. And no matter how many times we have made that point to the transit authority, that service continues to be bad. They could fix it. They haven't. Well, you're transit rich. I'm like, yeah, the stop is there, but the bus isn't. You have to make the bus work in order for this model to work. Otherwise, you're selling us a bag of goods, and that's unfortunate. So that gives me a lot of pause in considering these things. And thank you, George. Presentation is awesome as usual. And thank you for encouraging the board members to, try to get ahead of this and, opine at every opportunity that they're given, and then some. I think we need to, and I really do hope that they take this into consideration. I've heard, Torres Springer and Garodnik, and on a couple of these, panel discussions, I have a lot of concern. I have a lot of concern. I think the emphasis is on making it faster for developers to get their buildings on board, and I get that in part, but there are people living in neighborhoods like this. And this is where I work. So this is what I'm concerned about. I'm like, go ahead, build your building faster, but it needs to be safe and it needs to serve the people in this community. I think the last thing I'll say, I think this City of Yes idea of developing in more areas and just certain areas, go ahead and do that. You're already building in East Harlem. You don't have an obstruction here.
Right.
Your obstruction is in all your, your low density neighborhoods that, that start hyperventilating as soon as you propose a 6-story building. Just go do the damn thing. Give me a break. Like, we have 30-story buildings, out the Yahoo over here, and we're fine. But it's those other neighborhoods that should be picking up their slack, where I think the emphasis, what I'm hoping, to put it on a hopeful note, where I'm hoping this administration actually just buckles down and says, well, you know what, you're going to scream at me, but this building's going here because we have a dire need for housing in this city. We have, I lied, one more thing. We have a vacant building that I just learned about in the last week in a conversation with one of our sister agencies that's managed, owned by HPD, controlled by HPD. Seems like there was a fire there. Otherwise, the building's intact. Should be 24 units, empty. Why isn't this thing rehabbed? We have a housing emergency, but the building's just there empty. That's ridiculous. So tell me that we have a housing emergency and that we have to buckle down and do everything we can to house people. I'm with you. But goodness, give me an answer on that building. Off the top of I can go to my Rolodex right now. There's people on this call that could rehab that building in a year. If I just hand it to them, like boom, and it's rehabbed and people are living in it. On this call right now, right? So we know how to do this. People are eager to do this, but these buildings shouldn't be being held up. If we're really about addressing this housing emergency, then we actually need to do it and not just, try to make things easier for developers at all costs. Because we all know that at all costs means that neighborhoods like this are the ones that suffer, or we end up with some ridiculous thing where it's a 60, story building with 4 apartments in it. That is, or whatever the damn numbers are. It's absurd, Okay, I lied and I'll stop talking now.
Oh, that's okay. Angel said a lot of what I was gonna say, but before I say what I'm gonna say, Jason Villanueva had his hand up, and he's trying to do double duty, and I don't know if Jason still would like to say something or if he is listening with half an ear. So Jason, it's your turn if you would like to say something and comment. So I don't think he's going to comment. He's, trying to fulfill several duties at one time. And so I just wanted to say that I agree wholeheartedly with Jason. I do see the two just lovely Jessica's points in trying to comment earlier in the process. And sort of, I wish, like, we have developers who come in and they do presentations to check off the box and ask us what we'd like and what we'd like to see. And sometimes, but I think there has to be more than that. I think this should be something on the front end where it's mandatory, where you're actually seeing what is being considered, that the community board has actually put forth in good faith, that reflects any changes that the community would like to see. And then the weighing in process at the end, the way we currently have it now. The way it is now, it's too almost haphazard, in the sense of when developers come to the community board to present and they make it seem like it's a wonderful project. I was mortified when I heard the 680 potential requirement from 700s to 680. I currently know someone who lives in a studio that I believe is supposed to be around those numbers, which don't seem to be. And so I'm definitely going to look into those things, because I think that our community gets shortchanged all the time. And I think that it would be interesting, as we mentioned the AIRS program, to get a sense of what that would mean if every building had to do a certain percentage of inclusionary housing, affordable housing, and would that stack up with the numbers that come by developers that do mandatory inclusionary housing? Is it on par? Would it be something more or less? Because at this point, we have a center that has gone up in Randall's Island for individuals who have come into this country and are looking to be serviced into a problem area of a 125th, using the bus and the whole host of issues that may, everything is pictured wonderfully, but the sad fact is that these people are going to need homes. It's not fair for anyone to live in a shelter for an extended period of time. And we haven't gotten serious, and as community board members, we need to pick up that gauntlet, and we have to start being very intentional in what we bring up and how we testify. And I think everyone here is spot on what they've said, and I think Angel really brought it home for me. So I'm not going to comment anymore, because I'll go on and on and on, and the meeting will be 3 hours long. So I'm not going to do that, but I am going to select George James, who has his hand up. Go ahead, George.
I just wanted to say one thing about what Angel was saying. It was like, if you notice, I said there's some changes that are being proposed in lower density neighborhoods. One of the changes that are being proposed is to make it easier to do 2-family houses in neighborhoods that allow for 2-family houses, and there's only 1-family houses, right? The amount of yield that you're talking about there is going to really be small, but it's a good idea. I mean, it's something that should be done, but it's like when you think about the comparative nature of it, it seems kind of silly. I also wanted to say, Jose is here from DCP. He may be able to. We should probably ask him for corrections on all the things that I got wrong, and see if he had any further comments.
Jose, feel free.
Yeah, I just want to thank you first for the space in here, and I think you guys are completely right, George. That was an incredible presentation. I probably listened to I don't know how many briefings on this, and you know, you put it very clear in here. And I just wanted to, you know, to say that the intention is not to change the city charter at the moment for what we understand in the working group. I know I am not one of the people who sit in the task force working on this, so I cannot tell you for sure, but the intention is not to change anything in the city charter, which means that, you know, the process for review for the community board and, you know, the whole ULAR process will remain the same. What we're talking about here is the pre-serve process. And what we had, you know, usually happen is when we get an application, the first thing that as the community liaison is, you know, how you talk to the community board. Are you sure when I get a project, for example, for community board 10 and 11, and they're trying to do some shared housing for college students, you know, I always had to raise to them, it's like, it might not be the best project for here because the community is looking for 2 and 3 bedroom houses. So it's part of just knowing your community and how you recommend. We can just do so much in trying to, you know, pursue the applicants and moving in that direction. We unfortunately don't deal with the third shift, the unit distribution of the building as a proposed actions. We are looking at the zoning envelope, we're looking at the urban design components, and that's when we refer the application. It, you know, typically has been taken between 6 months to 8 months for an application to come to DCP to get referred out. And, you know, what BLAST is trying to do is, as people have said, you know, we're trying to get the applications before they're fully baked, before DCP has invested all that time, staff, and resources on review many draft, you know, applications in terms of like, what are we proposing? Is this aligning with the zoning? Is aligning with the zoning resolution or not? We usually take 3 or 4 revisions for different applications. So what we'll just do is essentially remove that portion of the pre-cert and have that conversation with the community board in the beginning. Now, you know, like one of the things as planners who have like work in this communities and DCP for long is, you know, we're kind of worried that we might get applications that are completely out of context with the community board. If we are complaining that we get applications out of context now, we are very worried that somebody want to do what happened in 145 with 12 FAR. When you guys won't believe this, but when they came to us, it was proposed at 18 FAR, and it was a lot higher than that. It was like around 45 floors. So, you know, all of these conversations are going to happen now with the community board, and this is part of the whole process of like, you know, working together. But I just want you to be mindful that we are also kind of like want to treat this very carefully, and also, you know, make everybody aware of that and the amount of work that goes behind doors before, you know, comes out to the community board. Hopefully, you know, applicants are a little more, you know, understanding of what is coming out to community boards when they're proposing these types of developments. And, you know, that's very much what I wanted to say in the whole process of the pre-certification. But, you know, we're optimistic. We know we had not always done this work as it is now, when we do everything inside and try to avoid surprises at the last minute in public review or in the CPC presentations. You know, now we're going to try to do like some comments on the go, and the reservation is that we need to like look at a lot of things to make these comments. I've been having a DCP for almost 6 years now, and believe it or not, every single meeting, every single project is different. When I heard somebody from my colleagues who have been there for 10, 20 years, there is something that I didn't know that was highlighted by this project. As you know, George mentioned with the bedrock in Harlem for the, you know, garage parking spaces and all of this, that there are things that sometimes you are focused on the project itself and you might miss in the little details on the project. That's one of the things that we very worry about, but hopefully, you know, we have more stuff to do this type of work. We can flag these issues early on when we're having interest meetings with the applicants, but we're here for it, and, you know, we'll make it work. Hopefully it's a good partnership though.
Thank you, Jose. I just want to say a quick comment, and then George put his hand down because I think in deference of him, I think figuring that I have my hand up. The problem that I see is that community boards are not taken seriously. And so we treasure the time that we have to comment. And even though we put together healthy arguments and recommendations and excellent recommendations, a lot of times, depending on who is our elected official or what the city actually wants from this community and the trade-ins that this community has to constantly give into and not get what it needs back, which the next discussion will be the points of agreement. It is hard to, for me, lifelong member here in East Harlem, to take this as the way it's described, right? The conversations of what the community board wants and needs from its building and what it's looking for should have already occurred. That should be baked. DCP and everyone else should know what this community wants. And if the community board is not doing enough to get that message out, then the community board will buckle down and do that, right? The idea for me to weigh in at the beginning of a project to sort of give recommendations that may or may not be considered, and then at the back end not being able to again weigh in is problematic for me. So my suggestion is that this community board and all community boards that may be affected need to really know their community, put down their recommendations of what they'd like to see every developer. And we have those recommendations, and people do come to us and they ask us how much hiring they should do, but then it goes out of the wayside. So, I applaud anything that gets things going in a positive direction, but not at the expense of community input and people to weigh in, and people like this learned group here that can talk to me and tell me things that I don't know, like just the Jessicas and Beverly and Angel and Candy, Jason can tell me things that make me spin. But the fact of the matter is they know, right? And having George on our backs, right, behind us, is an amazing tool and as amazing person that we have. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you for explaining, but our communities cannot get shortchanged anymore. And for instance, right now we have a major problem on 125th. We've been fighting forever trying to sort that out. Now we have an influx of people that are going to be bused into from that area with, I don't know what discussions happened here, right? But I would sense, and I hope that everyone here understands that we have to make sure that any engagement that we do is an effective engagement, whether it's partially in the beginning where we do at the pre-cert, and then at the end when we really have the ability to vote a project. We had a project that we voted on, they were going to give us 3 schools. Guess what? They're not giving us 3 schools. They told us they weren't going to give us 3 schools. But the community board, in good faith, voted on that because for the schools, the housing was okay, but the schools. And now we're trying to find or consider different avenues where those schools could be. So, I look forward to hearing more about this, and I look forward to George continually educating me and my fellow committee members, bringing things to the fore for me. And I just plan to look into it. I think anything that might change a community's input without proper study and proper discussion with the people that it's going to affect is very short-sighted. George?
Thank you. I have 2 comments. I think getting the community board involved in pre-certification, like in meetings or that's like a game changer. Like that would be fantastic, right? That's what you want. I mean, that's what Jessica was saying is like, the earlier in the process, the better. And if there could be a partnership like that, not only in this community board, but all community boards, that's a game changer. Like that would be really fantastic. The other thing, just Nilsa, one thing I will add to your comments is to say that yes, the community board and the community has been disappointed by certain projects, but there have been some successes. And I think it needs to be, to say that there is a model to go forward by looking at some of those successes. And I think the multi-service center is a project where we spent an enormous time, this committee spent an enormous time planning for that. And we had these different scenarios and different programs, and we went through it. And then And then we had the presentation earlier this year about what they were going to propose there, and it was really similar to what came with a recommendation that came out of this committee. It was astounding to me when I saw it. I was like, yeah, planning works. and that is like, you know, I guess that's a model, is what I'd like to say, is that yes, you know, the ECF project on 96th Street, that's a real disappointment, but they're not all disappointments, and there can be examples where it works. And, you know, I'd like to see, you know, us build on those successes, or like see the community board build on those successes, like what happened at the multi-service center.
No, and I agree. That was a testament to your work and Community Board 11's work, and Angel's prodding and pushing us to start thinking about this project way before because of that. And the reason it was so successful was because we had not-for-profit developers who were willing to listen and echoed, and they were in the community and echoed similar to what the community board wanted and really went out of their way. The danger is that not every developer that comes in front of the community board has that good faith intent, especially if they're not-for-profit builders, or they just in a community, but they have other. So I do agree with you, because, you know, I understand that, and I happen to be involved in the multi-service center project. So, you know, we're living that experience. And so we have had no complaints with the developers. It's other projects that circumvent the process in a way that the community board's voice is muted, you know. So thank you for that, George. Jose, one last comment, and
yeah, just wanted to say one last comment on this. And then, you know, like I mentioned, you know, we always encourage developers to come to the community board. There's some that get it, you know, I can highlight Ascendant, for example. They're all in all community board meetings. You know, every time we meet with them, informational, they are already there, so we don't have to remind them. What is happening also with Blast, and I forgot to mention this point, is right after the informational meeting, the applicant is able to file a PS, pre-application statement, which makes the record available in our SAP portal search bar. We might not be able to, you know, look directly for, you know, the actual, you know, requirement for them to meet with the community board, but if like the project is already existing, the community board might be able to like find that information and try to, you know, see, at least prepare to what is coming later on. And that's one of the tweaks that we asking for, because, you know, to be completely honest with you, we also want to ensure that, you know, when we are getting this public review comments, there is already some conversation begging the process, because between public, like the public review only lasts maximum like 120 days. And to do a whole application that will normally do in 6 to 8 months, it's going to be a crunch time for everybody. And then it goes to the writing the report, which is the scariest part, and how to make all those comments. So hopefully, you know, that is right now our pipeline team is working on fixing that particular PS, the pre-application statement step, to see how that becomes public. Because before it was a certification, now we're trying to at least get the record out so people get a little more familiar with what's going on. But more details are coming on this, and I think, you know, we still, like George said, we're like some time ahead from this other text amendments. We like a little more closer we Blast, but, you know, there's some minor things to keep getting out. So the more feedback we get from the community boards and all the members of the public, the better for us, so we can actually, you know, inform the decision makers that are working on this. So that's all for me tonight, unless you have other questions.
Thank you, Jose. I'm gonna let Jessica close out this segment. So Jessica, if you would, if you have a question or last comment, and then we will be moving on with the agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nilsa. And I'm grateful for the frame of this discussion. My question is, how do we proactively plan to make something of this discussion as we move forward? I think there are 4 different timelines in front of us now, and I think one of the most critical aspects of participating in, you know, doing the work of a community board is wrapping your head around the timelines that we're required to respond to, first and foremost. So how do we continue to digest the information? And Nilsa, you're always so humble in acknowledging, you know, what you know and what you don't. And I think all of us with zoning, it's and how do we make sure that we're not missing the boat? What are the opportunities? There will be hearings, there will be opportunities to submit testimony. Will there be formal inquiries from various task force? George, do you have a sense of that? And then Nilsa, is there, and this is maybe a question for Jason and the committee, is this something, I know back in the Stephen tenure, Villanueva 1, the tenure of rolling action item list was something, the rail was something that Stephen liked to have, and as a way of keeping things prescient. But it's very difficult month after month. It'll be December, it'll be 2023 before we know it. So how do we make heads or tails of what our valuable input is and be prepared to put that forward when it's requested of us, which may be a very quick turnaround when we do finally get sense.
So Jason has his hand up, but George, I don't know if you have an answer to for Jessica that will help inform Jason's question.
Sure. So what we've been told, Jessica, is that they want comments prior to it being referred out, right? So normally we give comments, the community board gives comments after, after it's been referred out, after the process has started. The process hasn't started and they want comments now. So there is no deadline because there's no statute on this. However, I think we should take them at their word and give them comments as soon as possible. Or I think the community board should consider comments as soon as possible. And the sooner the better, because the sooner they get comments, the more time they have to work them into things. I have found working with community boards is that it's often good to have a smaller working group, like a task force, that with people who are really interested in the topic. And it could be people from this committee or not. Or, this is a relatively small committee. Maybe this committee is it. I don't know. But that's an issue really for this board to decide, this committee to decide how you want the mechanics of developing recommendations, learning more about the proposal, developing recommendations, getting the recommendations approved by committee and the board so that they can be submitted to DCP. I mean, that's a lot of steps, and you're going to have to figure out how to make those steps happen.
Thank you, George. Jason was on the call and I don't know if he got off. So what I'll do is let's wrap this up now. It'll give us food for thought, and if Jason gets back on, and I'll select him so that he can comment if he has something germane to this for this discussion. And if not, then I'm sure that he will be bringing this up, but I'm sure Angel, and with what he's hearing, he will be reaching out to the committee to see how we can affect and craft our comments for submission and what we should be doing. And I'm sure Angel and George will also be assisting and giving us a lot of pointers. So with that, I want to thank you, George. You're always welcome to stay in case Jason calls in, but if you don't, I understand. And again, I thank you for educating all of us again. With that, we're going to move to part B of the agenda. It's the fiscal year 2024 statement of district needs and budget requests. Now, we currently have 3 of them. I don't know if you have them handy or there's Angel. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Jose's bothering me on this one too. So
okay. So
Jose's giving me a lot of work.
So if you look at them, let's see, I can't move them, but so we currently have 3 of them. They were reviewed by the staff. If you see the first one, I don't know if you have them handy, but I can read it out loud, or if you can read it to yourselves. But the first request, thank you, he knows I'm blind. The first request, yeah, we're getting there. Okay, so the first request, it's under the tracking code 311-202-304C. And the request was to expand the loan programs to rehabilitate multiple dwelling buildings. And the reason was to expand the home repair and preservation financing multifamily housing rehabilitation loan program, HRP in East Harlem. The expansion of HRP will incentivize necessary building improvements while preserving and creating additional affordable housing units. The agency is HPD, and a response was that OMB supports the agency's position as follows. They will try to accommodate.
Nelson, I'm very sorry. I had the wrong tab up.
Do
Let me
you?
slide over. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was land use that I should have open. Hold on.
Ah, so let's
Sorry
move
about
it
that.
over.
Hold on.
Now you're gonna pretend that you didn't hear me babble on, and I'm going to read. I actually have the right ones in front of me, so I can start us on that. So the first one is 311-202-301C, and the request is to provide more housing for special needs households, such as the formerly homeless. And our reasoning was that we want to provide funding for the development of affordable housing at deeper levels of affordability, targeting households living under 30% of AMI, the developmentally disabled, those living with mental illness, and homeless veterans. The agency involved with that is HPD. And the OMB response was that it supports the agency's position as follows. The agency will try to accommodate this issue within existing resources, and it will be accommodated in part. So their response was the same as for the housing. They will try to accommodate. And so the second one, I don't know if the committee would like to take them apart. It's only 3 of them. If we want to just get through the first one first, or if you want me to read all of them and then, but if we go by the first one, and I don't see any suggestions, right? Let's discuss. Jessica, Elliott.
I was just gonna say, we went through it all at once and then we had to go back and do them all individually again. So I feel like it might be better to just do them one at a time.
Okay, so if we do the first one, right? And Jessica, Jessica put her hand up. You were gonna help me as well. Thank you. Jessica, do you have a comment other than what Jessica Elliott said?
No, I think it's a great suggestion. 1-2 punch.
Okay. Yeah, I think always. So the first one, about more special needs for housing for special needs households, the staff also reviewed it and suggested we keep it. Now, I don't know if from the last time that we had this meeting, it was tabled, are there any thoughts on whether we should keep this, remove this? And if we're keeping it, what will be the priority? Will it be low priority, medium priority, and high priority? So feel free if anyone wants to start the discussion as to whether we are keeping the first one.
Nelson, I'm going to take that as an open floor.
Jessica, yes.
Thank you very much. For the sake of expediency and to acknowledge, I think the staff's recommendation and this being a longstanding request for housing for vulnerable populations, it seems to make sense to keep this ask and to go with a high priority for the ask where we're not unlimited.
Okay. Thank you. Angel, because I'm doing this and Jason is not. Once we get am I getting the recommendations from every single board member, or if after the recommendation, we be voting on it as a committee?
So what we've been doing in the other committees, just like reaching a consensus. And once you're comfortable that you have a consensus and you tell me to type and keep, I type and keep.
Okay.
If you want to do a vote to make sure, like if it's a split decision, and you want to do a vote just so you have something official, fantastic.
All
But
right,
so far, we've been able to go with consensus.
okay, cool. So now Jessica Elliott, your hand is up. What do you think about that one?
I agree with all that's been said.
Okay, so it's gonna be keep and high priority. Yes? Okay, I'm gonna go down the list and I'm gonna select people. Beverly,
Yes, yeah, that is a high priority. 30% under the AMI of people that need housing is so much needed. And even people that don't even have the special needs, we have people that's under 30% AMI, and housing is such a shortage for that community, that group of people. So yes, I would definitely say keep it.
okay. Thank you, Beverly. I will let you know that Candy Viva Vasquez in the chat, I'm reading it out loud so it can be read into the record, said to keep it and to make it a high priority item. So with that, Jessica Elliott gave us her, and Mr. Kenneth Crouch, last but not least.
Yeah, I'll chime in. Absolutely keep high priority. I think most of the affordable housing that we've seen built recently, especially under 421A, none of them have the kind of AMIs that we need. I think this would be rare and really needed in our community. So absolutely, yes, keep high priority.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Crouch. And I will tell you that I myself feel the same way. It should be keep, it should be high priority, it should be put on the fast track, but not only for our for all that were mentioned, but in the future, senior citizens are trapped in places where they are living because they cannot get out, or if they can afford something better, there's not enough places. So I definitely applaud the work of this committee, and I say keep it and make it high priority. So it seems, Angel, as we went one by one, we reached a 100% consensus to keep it and make it high priority. Now I'm going to move on to the second one. Okay. The second one is number 311-202-302C. Provide more housing for extremely low and low income households. The reasoning was there remain many vacant properties or underutilized residential buildings in East Harlem. It is imperative that the community, elected leaders, and HPD work collaboratively to create the necessary incentives for private property owners to upgrade and maintain their properties for active residential use. Newly developed or rehabilitated apartment buildings must include a balance of mixed income units that also include a percentage of units for low and extremely low income households. The agency in charge of that is HPD, and OMB supports the position as usual with their standard answer. The agency will try to accommodate this issue within existing resources, and OMB direct response was that the funding for this request cannot be determined at this time. And so going by the list, I am looking, and I'm going to I'm going to select Candy Viva Vasquez. Candy, what would you like to say?
Hi, I would like to add, besides the owners, landlords, but can you also add in some of the city that are warehousing their own offices, that they have property as well, like DCAS and HPD, that they can also convert them into housing as well?
Okay, so is there, in terms of changing the language, do I need to take a motion on that to include city-owned properties as well, Angel? Or is it because it's for discussion, we can just add it in if nobody has an objection?
I'm just reading and see if there's space here, whether that needs to be another, because if Candy's suggesting that there are properties that aren't residential to convert to residential, maybe that's another request.
Well, what I mean is that, you know, that DCAS does have some buildings that are vacant, you know, and they can also be utilized to become housing apartments, and some of them, and even HPD, like you said, that whole building that has 24 units, you know, we should press upon them as well, not just property owners.
Okay, so you're not referring to non-residential buildings, you're referring to any residential buildings that could be in city ownership.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Would that be okay? Does this
Yep,
sound all
yep,
right
yep,
with
yep, yep.
everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll just change some of the wording. I'll copy this over.
Sounds fine to me. Um,
I have a
Um,
question.
Jessica?
Sorry, this is Jessica Morris. I put in the comments box on the document a question, 2 points to clarify. One, it's my understanding that questions about preservation come from housing. Questions about new development come from land use. So I questioned whether the first 2 sentences need to be a part of this request, even though, Candy, I totally understand where they're coming from. So that's one point of clarification. Is it preservation or is it development? And then I just want to acknowledge that we're identifying extremely low and low as income bands in AMI, but we're not identifying very low, which is also a classification and which falls between extremely low, and I think matters if we're being specific about what kind of housing we want to be asking for. And so extremely low, very low, and low would encompass everything from 0 to 80% AMI.
okay. Is there any objection to adding the very low from anyone in this committee to that request?
May I speak?
Beverly?
Yes, I agree with Jessica regarding the bands. They should all be included from 80% down.
Okay.
Housing is so much needed, and even though we've had developers coming and they get these tax breaks to develop housing, but they're not putting enough housing for this band right here. Most of the time, it's usually 51 to 80% plus of housing, rentals, and we need something lower. We definitely need, because that's what's in the shelters. That's where the people are looking for housing. Those are the ones that are struggling. So yes, those need to be included. That band definitely needs to be included. I just recently downloaded the 2022 New York City area AMI and the affordable rents with the band use, so I can see them presently in front of me on a regular basis. So when we're talking about the AMI and what the rents are, even though it's 30%, whatever the incomes are, sometimes it's hard for us to understand, for me to understand what those numbers are. So I just I mean, literally today, just put it a little sheet with those numbers from 30% AMI all the way up to 165. And I see more housing for the higher income, even with the breaks that we give developers, and not enough for the ones that's below 80% AMI, even in home ownership or any type of housing. And it needs to be increased, because these are the ones people who are suffering and needs the housing. So I 100%.
Thank you, Beverly. Angel, I want to ask you a question, because when I read there remains many vacant properties, underutilized residential buildings in East Harlem, while I understand preservation, because I actually work for a housing preservation company and one of my other hats, the fact that they're underutilized leads to having rehabs and where it's actual development. Where any projects that are like that, depending on what the building is, may have to come in front of the community board for some kind of action. So is it not prudent? Well, that may not be what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, should those 2 sentences not be removed because of the classification of potentially the underutilized property or vacant properties?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
So for instance, we have a lot of it. We have for instance, in front of the multi-service center, we have empty buildings that
Mhm.
have not been used for housing. They obviously have apartments that should be developed and will need some type of rehabbing. That any project that comes in terms of that building would have to come or should come, if it's a city-owned property, to land use to discuss the rehab. Am I not correct?
Rehabs don't come to us unless there's a disposition.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. So
Yeah.
would it be wrong? Like Jessica makes a good point about it coming from housing, but it wouldn't be a problem coming from us, would it?
It
Because
isn't a
we're-
problem, and Jessica makes a good point. However, the recommendation that when it came out of this committee, put it all in one place. That's why it's
Right.
existing here.
Okay,
No other reason. Like, but Jessica's point is accurate that preservation recommendations should be coming out of housing and development recommendations should be coming out of land use. But the board doesn't always listen to me, as evidenced by this
But so
request.
I think if anything, if there's a need, we collectively as the board should make an ask. And I think this is the issue of silos, that if we are recognizing a need and it happens to be coming from a different place, is there, are there two asks embedded in here essentially? Or, one for newly developed, calling for a balance of the AMIs that we're looking for, and another ask that specifically relates to, and maybe housing already has it covered, but these substantial rehabilitations and vacant incentives for property owners. So not wanting to strike out those two sentences because it's not valuable, but just saying, are we actually asking for more than just this one line item in raising the question?
Angel, do you want to take a crack at that, or do I call another committee
Me?
member? Yeah, no, I thought that she
Oh.
was responding to what you were saying, to my
Yeah,
response.
if I'm hearing you right, if you're suggesting that, or if you're asking this or should this be two requests, I think so.
I don't see anything quite like the first couple of sentences in the housing tab after a quick
Yeah.
scan.
The housing committee part is already, it's over because the committee already passed. So we can just have it here and they can take it over next year. But they won't get an opportunity to weigh in again because their meeting already happened. But we can just proceed with splitting it if that's what this committee wishes to do. And I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, so I'm gonna call on Candy and Beverly, and then we'll take up the splitting of this and how best to split, so that then we can then prioritize both of them and decide. So it would probably bring us back to 3 as opposed to 4. When I get to the third one here, I'll explain why I said that. So Candy?
So I've been fighting with this. As you can see, I've been putting my hand up and putting it down. But I don't know. I'm just gonna throw it out there, and it's up to you guys to say yes, no, or bad idea, or whatever. But because of the low and the very low, and the city tries to say, we're catering to giving you guys the very, very low, affordability, but it's still not enough, right? So where can we put in language? And I'm just gonna throw it out there, and you guys put it wherever it could fit or make sense. We have the Department of Finance that provides the SCREE and the DREAM. And maybe this has been unprecedented, and I never heard of this happening, but it wouldn't be the first to at least ask and even get a no or yes. Can we at least recommend that if a unit is for a senior, right, a very low income, or someone that is disabled, that maybe the part of the incentive is to give that individual to come in with the city, right, the Department of Finance, to provide the SCREE or the DREE for that individual, for that unit, right? I know that that doesn't happen only because you need to have an apartment first before you can get the SCREE or the DRE. And SCREE is for the senior citizen rent increase exemption, and the DRE is for disabled, exempt for those that are disabled. And I know that you tend to get a tax incentive if you do have individuals in the development receiving these incentives, right? So why don't the city then work it out that we can then be able to, like a supplement for the individuals who are the very, very low, that are making $9,000 a year and can't even afford to move into anything right now. Because the Housing Connect doesn't have anything that is below even at the $10,000. And everybody could see that we're not blind about it. And not even at the 20, right? So I know that in order for an individual to to have a requirement is having the maximum of income is $50,000. Now, you know that a lot of our seniors, well, at least those that are applying, even now for different apartments, they still cannot afford the affordability. So I don't know, I'm just throwing it in there. Where can we fit it? Just throwing that idea. I don't know if it's crazy here or I missed the boat with the housing committee. I don't know. But I'm just thinking strategy wise.
Well, I'm gonna ask Angel and anybody else who has an opinion, but if it's a new development, I could see that, but if it's part of preserving people in housing and stuff like that, maybe housing would be the committee, but I don't know, Angel, is there anything that says because we want to put it in the best place for advocacy, but housing has already done,
Right.
Well,
Well, not just that, but like I hear what Candy is saying, but there isn't a budget request there.
Mhm.
Like
Okay.
it's a very interesting idea, but it isn't a budget.
It's more of a commentary, like what we
Yeah, and,
feel.
and perhaps something to like, maybe a policy recommendation to make to the agency, via another channel, but it doesn't match this exercise.
Okay, so that wouldn't, I'm just saying we should just push for that. Maybe they could think about a policy that way. But I
Yeah,
figured that will help out, it's a different scenario. We're in new era right now, so,
Right. So that's something maybe we can definitely bring out of this committee to let housing know your recommendation. And maybe at the next housing meeting, Candy, is something you can also mention there. I do know that some new apartments come with some Section 8 for the actual apartment. It's project-based Section 8. So there may be something like a SCREE or DRE kind of apartments where it's
right,
a project-based kind of idea. So I think
yeah,
that maybe that's something maybe for the next housing so that we can discuss it, because it's definitely something we should try to look into. Thank you
Okay.
for bringing that up. Okay.
okay. Thank you, guys. All right,
You're welcome.
thanks. Thanks.
Beverly?
Yes, I had a question. I know when Andrew brought up the difference between preservation and new developments that is under land use. Is there a when a building is being rehabilitated, is it not consider a new building or
no,
we just, oh, okay. Okay, that's right. That it was a certain amount of rehabilitation that had to be done to the building.
Yeah.
That it would be called under the Department of Buildings, a new building or something like that. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah. I was just thinking about my comment from before about splitting this. I'm gonna retract that suggestion. I think this is only one request. I think the request is only from the newly down. I think the top is just kind of laying out a scenario. So I'm gonna retract my previous comment.
Okay, so if we take the comment, Beverly, do you still have a question or you forgot to put your hand down?
Oops.
Oh, thank you, Beverly. So if we look at the comment the way it is, with any additional, adding the very low and adding a Candy suggestion, if that's going to be added about any city properties that are not being used. If we keep this as is there any resistance to that? Jessica Elliott?
No, I was just gonna say, I think we can keep it, change the language as we've discussed and rank it as a high priority.
Thank you, Jessica. Beverly, you have your hand up?
Yes, I see that in the language you do have rehabilitated apartment buildings. So do we take that out? Or does that get to stay if rehabilitation is part of preservation?
I say we leave it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we need to be really careful of interpreting and getting everything like too much into the weeds. The fact of the matter is, the way I read this, it's advocating because there's a really great need, right, for apartments, and there's a really great need, especially for our low, very low, and extremely low households. In addition to regular households, sometimes you just can't pay your rent.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that if we really want to fine tune it and divide it, it might be something that we need to give that more thought and from a land use perspective. But I think, in my opinion only, it seems to say what we want to say. And it may have more than one idea behind it, or it may have narrative that gives that impression, but the idea is that we're looking for buildings not to be warehoused. We're looking for buildings that are underutilized to be used. Some of it could be a ULURP action, depending on whether it's a lot or a building has to get raised because it's unsafe, and then it becomes a new kind of thing where we have to weigh in. So speaking for myself only, I would leave it as is and make it a high priority. And I'm going to go down the list of our participants so that we can then comment, and then Angel can take in any other comments. Beverly, did you weigh in? I know that you had just asked a question about preservation.
Yes, I believe that it should stay as a high priority.
Thank you, Beverly.
Yes.
Candy?
I'm good. I believe it should stay like that as well.
Okay. Jessica already said it should stay on there. Jessica Morris brought up some points in terms of the language. Jessica?
Thanks, Nilsa. I think it's a great budget request to keep, and it's clearly a high priority. I'll also just mention, to Candy's point about DRE and SCRE, housing does have a line item to provide, expand, or enhance community outreach for HPD programs and services, and specifically name those. So Candy, you're covered.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
All right. See, Kenneth?
Yeah, I agree with everyone who's echoed so far, and I want to thank Jessica Morris for including the comments about making sure we hit every range of affordability from low, very low, and extremely low. I think that's great.
Thank you, Kenneth. You're last, but you're not least, and I will say we save one of the best for last. So it's nothing personal. Maybe I'll select you the next time first. So that's the two of them. Now the last one, I'm going to read it quick. It's 311-202-325E. It's increased community board training, including on core land use process and practices. The reason is to provide funding for digital ULURP trainings, as well as outreach to promote the new trainings in East Harlem. These trainings would educate the community on how to engage with the new digital ULURP process and make their voices heard in the land use development process, including affordable housing creation for East Harlem. DCP is the agency that was identified, and the agency gave their canned response. They will try to accommodate this request with existing resources, but this time it says OMB supports this. And then the rest says that the community board should contact the responsible agency regarding this request. Our staff looked at it and suggested removal.
Why?
Angel, is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, because
Because I have,
they're already doing this.
yeah,
So
I was just gonna say, we do get trainings. We don't, if we don't avail ourselves of trainings, it's not because they're not offered. Um, and so,
yeah, when we first started asking for this, they weren't doing it. Now,
right.
now they are. So mission accomplished.
So it seems like it's a redundant request. You heard Angel Muscane say it. You heard Candy respond. But now, Candy, you understand why it was suggested for removal. And Jessica Morris will weigh in. Jessica?
Yeah, I just want to, I think maybe there's another category besides removal, like triumph, like we did it, like hurrah. Because I think, it sounds like defeat when we're removing it, but in fact, if it's an accomplishment, maybe that's another direction. Yes, it does go away, but it's chalk up a point for the community board. So I would recommend that our spreadsheet have another drop down that says triumph or win or something of that nature, so we can all celebrate as we dismiss the line item.
I agree. Accomplished, take it off our list. But yeah, I mean, it's always nice to see things we advocate for, right? Get funded. So if there is no objection to removal of the item because we have, as Candy just popped up in the chat, mission accomplished. If there's no one to say nay, then I would suggest that we go with the staff recommendation of removing it. We don't know, we also don't want to seem like we don't know what's funded and what isn't funded. And we don't want to give the impression that we're not on top of our game, so to speak. And so if Angel says it's been funded, I have no reason to doubt it, because we've been the beneficiary of trainings. So is there any resistance to removing this item?
Nope.
Nope. Jessica Morris, nope. Candy, no. I'm going to ask Kenneth, because I'm not going to leave you for last this time, Kenneth.
Okay, no opposition whatsoever.
And Candy said no. And Beverly?
I agree with it, with everyone else.
Okay, so we're removing that item. So those are our 3 items. Hurrah, according to the note that I see there. And with that, we're going to move on to our the rest of our agenda. And so we're at old business. And so our chair, Villanueva, wanted as part of old business for us to bring up the points of agreement and the fact that the tracker that we've talked about, and coming up with ideas, right? Coming up with ideas of what we would like that tracker to be. If there's an existing tracker that we think we want to adopt, and so to send comments, right? So I think originally he anticipated that this meeting would be shorter than it's not coming on 9 o'clock. So I wanted to bring the fact of the tracker, anything that we come up with, he said will be sent to the committees, and that there's going to be more of an in-depth conversation in November. But is there anything right now, Jessica, I know Jessica Morris has her hand up, that you would like to bring out in terms of the points of agreement and any potential tracker for consideration for more in-depth conversation, whether through another meeting or in the next November meeting? Jessica?
Thank you, Nilsa, and I'm glad Jason had intended to have this conversation. I think old business can be misleading because there's nothing on the slide, no bullet points. So I think it might be important, the points of agreement tracker, which is it's a PDF, right? In my understanding, there's also a digital tool where you can look at the boxes checked and the points delivered. Though I think we are aware of a couple of sticky points that have not gotten the traction that they should have gotten. And we're starting to languish here in 2022. 2017 was 5 years ago, and people quickly forget. So I think it would be good practice to start to call out some of those issues as bullet points in our old business, just so that we can be reminded of them by seeing them on the screen. And the screen, you know, our meeting format might change when we're back in person, but I think for members of the public attending the screen, it's a tool that we now have to be able to use. That being said, I'm not sure technically if ECF falls under a points of agreement, though I think it's separate. It was not included in the rezoning, but it should be a topic that we actively keep on, including a number of questions about requesting more information from ECF other than, sorry, the numbers don't work, we're not going to build your schools, that's not adequate. And what are the grounds for a rezoning to be void if what was written into law essentially is not being delivered ultimately, and if ECF was the lead agency in starting that rezoning process, the lead applicant. So has the community board been provided any information about the lawsuit that essentially held it up? And again, the question of the numbers, which we now understand are prohibitive for delivering what was promised. The other point, even if all of those questions are wrapped up in just a single bullet point that has 3 letters attached to it, I think that reminds us all that we have to be doing that work meeting to meeting. The other one being the DSNY promises, which we talked a little bit about after George's fabulous presentation last go around. And I just also want to pose a question. It may be new business, and please redirect me if it is, but
is it new business? I'll tell you if it is when you say it. Go ahead.
Well, a question of new federal funding streams that may relate to some existing or languishing projects that would be beneficial to better understand, know about, and advocate for with the fairly recent legislation that passed, whether that can support and get us over the finish line on some of these big asks. It would be worth us piping up and kind of inquiring with our agency partners, et cetera, to understand if, connecting some dots from some dollars that seem really far away may not support the case for bringing them close to home.
If it's something we haven't discussed before, if you're
New
saying it's
business. Good.
then I would suggest it would be new business, because then we can hear a little bit more in depth of what you're talking about and find out if there's any timelines for any monies that have to be applied for and reviewed and prioritized in our agendas and in committee work, so that then we can best advocate for any dollars that we could probably use for any projects. So I think now it's a little
separate that last piece then, which seems like it is new business, from the old business.
right.
A point for ECF, a point for DSNY, I think would be really helpful in activating that frame of points of agreement. And the points of agreement itself, it doesn't have an updated on indication anywhere on it. So every time you download it, it looks the same, whether things on it have changed. And so that might be a specific request to DCP that they indicate somewhere on the document, if it is a formal document as a points of agreement tracker, that they indicate somewhere on it when it was updated. Because every time I look at it, it looks the same. And I say, what's the latest date here? That must have been when it was updated.
Thank you. That's actually a very good point. I bow to the Jessicas again, and because Jessica Elliott is going to bring something home with a good follow-up. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thanks, Nelsa. I just wanted to, bring up the garage, and let you know that we're all continuing to work on that. I know shares responsibility between this committee and the Environment, Open Space and Parks Committee. But we have been talking, Angel, Xavier, George and I about how to move forward with what's happening, and DSNY not having a plan for any immediate solution to something that they committed to in our rezoning. And we're looking at addressing it by thinking comprehensively about Manhattan in general. And basically everyone's sanitation garages in Manhattan are a mess except for lower Manhattan there. So thinking about maybe starting some sort of coalition, or at least like bringing together that sort of information with our overarching need with the points of agreement. So it's on my plate. I have a lot of things on my plate to continue to follow up with, but whoever would like to be involved in those conversations, just let me know.
Yeah, I'm at the point where we just have to shame them, call a network and let them know how they just don't follow up on their word.
Yeah,
this
and
community
we have been.
Yeah, and I'm glad, this is the leadership team, and Angel has the years of experience and the right way to advise. He's not perfect, because I don't want him to think he's perfect, but he's very good for us. He's perfect for us. And I just think that, again, this community gets promised lots of things until people get what they want, and then that's it, right? So, you get a property, you can keep your, you can't do things on Randall's Island, but you can stay within our streets, and we, take a parking, and on and on and on. So I agree, Jessica. I think that you all are on the right track, and if there's any way I can assist, I will be happy to do so. Jessica Morris?
Yeah, I just want to, maybe I'm not involved in fighting the good fight necessarily. I think on a upfront kind of way, but I think there's an opportunity for a win to figure this out. And if DSNY can understand that, if they can understand that there's a huge opportunity for a win to do something that they haven't been able to figure out how to do. That's the bottom line. They haven't been able to figure out how to do it. And if they can, then we win and they win. And so that's the incentive to get them to, it's not up to them to solve the problem. It's up to, all of us to solve the problem. So if that can be the kind of the carrot, right? And where we don't really have a stick, then hopefully that might be something that incentivizes getting to a win, not only for our community, but also for an agency that they do good work, generally hard work, and to provide the type of service that they provide in a city like New York is really challenging. So to encourage you to play nice and do as much as you can to encourage DSNY to, the interactions I've had with the lowly folks outside, they were proud to do their job well. And I think, every agency representative, from the person, responsible for dealing with the corner basket to, the sort of the deputy commissioner, there's pride in that work that goes really deep. So, how do we turn that into something that can be reflected through how they maintain a presence in our district is, I think, the nut to crack, right?
Yeah.
And then dollars, and then delivery, and yada yada.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, those people who are on our levels are not the ones that make the decisions. And unfortunately, in my opinion only, so I'm not tying the community board to this feeling of mine. When there's no incentive to change a way of acting towards a community, because they've had the structures that are in place, because they're a government agency, even with community input, there's nothing there to really make a substantive change. And if there's a perception that community, any kind of community negativity towards a project because it doesn't enhance the community will eventually go away, because things fade away. It's just a perception that I have had. And so if we don't, we can acknowledge the good work that line people do, that staffing do on the corners and stuff. Unfortunately, they're not the ones that make that decision. So I will always thank my sanitation person for the work that they do and the rats that they kick out of their way as they're doing it. But it would be nice to see agencies that so affect our community become a little bit more responsive to us, because we're not going to take it anymore. Jessica?
Yeah, I agree about not using the hammer. And I think that, like we were talking to George about all the different garage situations, and apparently CD6 was supposed to get a consolidated garage 9 years ago. And basically no district has its own district's garage. And, the DSNY footprint in Manhattan is increasing. And I think they just need like a large scale solution that, maybe they can't generate on their own. Where else I was going to say, yeah, but I think DSNY, there's been a lot of turnover in the organization, and I think this project has been in motion or in not motion for like a decade. So we've had turnover, they've had turnover, and it's just something that we have to maintain the institutional knowledge over time, because last we heard, they didn't think that they said that there wasn't a site that was proposed by the CAG, which is false. So, there's just some follow-up that needs to be done. And I think, we can have a larger scale conversation about it.
Angel?
I'm going to disagree with two people that I like very much. The Department of Sanitation, every agency should be, all of our colleagues should be treated with respect. That goes both ways. The Department of Sanitation has not budged on responding to this community in terms of its needs for sanitation, period, for decades. And that they have an entire real estate department that has not been able to resolve this in decades, I think, for whatever it's worth, is an indictment of them and a clear example that they're not motivated to respond to this community. And other community districts, with all due respect, are not my concern. My concern is this district. And this district has 4 locations. And unless we keep the focus on this agency and keep the heat on this agency, we stand no chance. It's been an additional 5 years since they committed to providing a new garage. 5 years. At no point in my entire employment here has the Department of Sanitation come proactively and said, by the way, we recently had a conversation about the potential and, re-siding of your garage. And, no, not at no point. At no point. They only moved the thing off the 99th Street because we ended up having the Speaker of the Council that made them do it. So while I always treat all my sister agencies, all the sister agencies with respect and my colleagues with respect, in this regard, that department has proven time and again to have no time for this community. And I won't stand for it. I just won't. I'll go down in blazes for this one. Every other thing, I will be very diplomatic. In this regard, is utterly disrespectful the way that that agency has treated this district. And I spoke directly to her face. They had no interest in budging. No interest in budging. And I want to see that garage open on 127th Street. Jessica sent an article. I'm going to go there tomorrow. And I'm going to go look for the trucks in the street. Because that's been my fear ever since they proposed that temporary garage, that they're going to have trucks in the street on 127th Street. And I hope I'm wrong. But I just fear that we're going to have more trucks in the street. So we'll see. But I say keep the heat on them. Actually, there's no heat on them. Put heat on them.
Exactly.
There's no heat on them. None of our electeds are pushing them. None.
Nobody.
Somebody needs to push them. And if that, you know what, the hell with the rest of that stuff. Push them on this. That needs to move. It needs to move for the benefit of the people that live in this district, for God's sakes. And they're not motivated to move those garages. They're just not. When they want to do something, they do it. They do it. Look at the bus depot. Years and years and years. Oh, when are we getting the bus depot? Within seconds of that depot being handed over, boop, new plan. Immediately. Oh, we're going to build buildings. We're going to do all kinds. I'm like, hold on a second. Where's the consultation with the community board? But they were motivated there. They have an incentive to develop there. So they're moving with it. Oh, what about the rest of the district? No conversation whatsoever. You couldn't even give them a bad idea. They had already decided. On 99th Street, they have a state-owned property that could also be used for a lot of good. And have they spoken to us? No. They're going to hang up on, we didn't get a letter from the CAG. Man, get out of here. The commitment says it in black and white. You're supposed to put a garage somewhere in the district, up to and including that site. I'm going to shut up because that agency has me beyond frustrated. And they're getting over on this district at 4 locations, a poor neighborhood at 4 locations. It's unjust and it's immoral, and it should not stand. And it doesn't matter that the representatives from their agency are very nice. They are quite nice, actually. It doesn't matter because they're not producing for this district. They're just not. And the funny thing is 4 garages and our streets are a mess.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
So what are we talking about? Sorry, I'm not yelling at you guys. I wish the reason why he was here so I could just go directly at them. But I'm like, come on.
Absolutely.
And I know they try really hard and we produce a lot of garbage. I get it. We have a lot of responsibility. But goodness, 4 locations. There needs to be a little bit more balance. And there just isn't. It's the same thing I was referring to earlier with that, all those zoning proposals. You want to address the housing emergency, go build in those low density areas where there's plenty of room, but you're not touching them. I wonder why, but you're touching us. I wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
It's wrong. It's immoral. That's why I get so worked up and I'm so impatient with that agency. Because they're negatively impacting a neighborhood that doesn't have the capacity to take all that abuse. We already have more than we need.
We want to keep you, Angel, so take a deep breath.
Huh?
Absolutely.
We
Nah,
want to
man, I'm
keep
outta here.
you. I know. No, I
His
don't want.
passion
I
side
see
came
my
out.
blood pressure's
No,
rising.
I'm
Your blood
Dominican. I
pressure's
operate
rising.
better when I'm worked up. I'll be okay, but thank you, sweetie. I appreciate
You
it.
do
Thank
no,
you, Jeff.
because you know it's you.
Yeah.
But I think hearing you again and again. I mean, that's you embody the institutional memory in so many ways of the trials and triumphs of the community, and this is continuing to be a trial. So for me to say play nice, you can get mad and you can disagree, and I will absolutely accept
No,
a
I'm
little
not-
bit
I'm not
of
mad
a
at you, I'm mad at them.
flogging. I know. Yeah, and rightly so.
It's just, Candy, do you have a comment? Then I'll close out this comment and then we'll move on to notation of the new business that Jessica, so at least to put it on the agenda for next time. Candy, you had a comment?
I just wanted to, agree with what Angel said. And, we need to remember that Okay, one is that 99th Street, you gotta go see it now. They have all those trucks out there and it's like they taking up also parking space. Okay, it looks disgusting and it's right where the hospital is. We need to definitely get on these people's case. We cannot forget that when the Young Lords took over back in the 60s, it was because of the garbage that was dumped, what was not being picked up the way we were being treated here in East Harlem. And it seems like we're going right back on a time warp. Okay, I mean, it's just, if we don't take a stand, we're gonna be, this is just, is a disrespect. We've been bamboozled by these people for too long. So I just agree with what the passion that came out of Angel, that we need to stand behind and really, not be laxy. I'm not gonna be disrespectful to anyone, but we need to just, we need to take a stand. And Community Board 11, we have to do that. Never mind anybody's backyard, but this is our backyard. And we have to take a stand on it and stay on top of it. I don't care if it's by media or whatever it is that we have to do, but we must do something.
Thank you, Candy, because I agree. I started the meeting with talking about going to the press and doing whatever we had to do to get the word out. And it's like anything, right? If we don't somehow, as Angel so eloquently says what I try to say, but he says it so well. If we don't find a way to bring a spotlight to this, it doesn't matter if we're part of task force. It doesn't matter who we speak to. There is no incentive. We are considered, right? Yeah, we go to the community board, but we are not considered in certain aspects a agent for change in this instance. So maybe consideration needs to be about having some kind of a forum regarding the sanitation, an informational session. We have health challenges, tying that in with a health fair or anything like that. But anything, taking pictures when we see these trucks in the street. Why? Because a picture is documentation, right? If an elected official is going to walk on 99th Street to tour the dirt, they're not going to see the DSNY trucks there. They're not going to, everything is going to be pristine. And it's always going to look like we're just complaining to complain. But we know what the real deal is. Angel mentioned going to 127th Street and seeing what's out there. If we don't start creating some kind of a campaign where and even if this puts pressure to our elected officials are not helping the situation. And so, if we are the people's representatives, then we have to represent. And whatever that means in a way that is not harmful to someone else, but definitely informative and something that puts on the pressure. I would love to, not obviously now, but see what the community board might come up with, because we can be the members of any task force, but if it doesn't change, we're just taking up seats in a chair. I agree wholeheartedly with everything Angel said. He said it more eloquently than I. And it will be interesting to see how we take on this issue and make our electeds also partner with us, because we can't be the voice in the wind by ourselves. With that, we're going to move to new business. Now, Jessica Morris had brought up, points. And so, Jessica, if you remember what you had mentioned, right, as part of potentially new business, and we were talking, I believe, about the points of agreement. I did make notes here, so I'm trying to find where I made a point. But if you remember what you said, if you would reiterate it for the record, I would appreciate it.
Sure, Nilsa. I think I think there's potentially an opportunity to better understand and mind the federal legislation that has passed recently. And part of this comes from the Second Avenue subway, which was essentially funded through the Big Infrastructure Act that passed. But also there are any number of overlays that may feed into that funding that can go farther and penetrate deeper into places that matter in the community that isn't necessarily about trains in a tunnel. Thinking about overlays for funding educational opportunities or workforce development opportunities. So it's something I brought up last night at Economic Development and Culture. Even though those big price tags that seem very far away, there are so many parts of that legislation that have earmarks for communities like ours, for good things to happen. And our agency partners, yes, are aware of those things and will try their very best. But if we can be diligent about understanding what those opportunities are and start to ask for them at every point in the conversation, it's essentially an opportunity to ask for more, because we deserve more because of the very things that you're pointing to historically in service delivery. It's time to make up for lost ground, and the funding streams are there. So as new business, it's not something that you can necessarily make headway on fast, but to start to engage in the conversation as much as we're able to. I think there's, there are levels and levels of understanding and application, but to be aware and to start to do some information gathering, to be proactive about things that may have not even been on the radar or may have felt out of reach, both in housing development, affordable housing development and support, services embedded in that affordable housing for seniors and other vulnerable populations, the equity framework as far as infrastructure development, and that includes not only the Second Avenue subway, but also things like sanitation and the Esplanade through storm and resilience planning that relate back to our streets. And again, we're at the infrastructure frame. So I think it is deeply embedded throughout all sorts of opportunities that we get dollars for, and by asking for more and having more conversations, more information about where those dollars can go to improve health, economic vitality, and wellness of folks who live in our district. That's what the intention is ultimately in the Build Back Better legislation. So we just have to figure out creatively how to keep asking for more and connecting those dots for for projects in the pipeline, and also those that seem further off.
Thank you, Jessica. So with that said, all of us can, those of us who obviously want to read more on the Build Back Better legislation and see, potentially compare with some of our asks and some of our points of agreement items, it would make sense, at least for all of us, to educate ourselves. It's not an assignment. That's not what the point I'm trying to make, but Jessica brought up some good points, and it wouldn't hurt all of us who advocate and are trying to put requests into consideration for more budgeting of those requests, that we look to see if there are ways that we can enhance any existing projects that might fit a certain definition for funding under this legislation, so that if that's a thing, then how we will move forward. So obviously that will evolve. That's not something that will be answered tonight, but thank you, Jessica, for bringing that up, because definitely it's something that I'm going to put on my radar I'm going to entertain this last question from Beverly, and then I'm going to ask Angel to do a roll call as we are already 9:30 in the evening. So I thank you all for a very productive and engaging meeting. Beverly?
Yes, thank you. And Jessica's asked for us to look at different ways of funding funding programs that can better help us in the endeavor that we have regarding housing and anything else. Our chair, Jason, told me about this program called EB5 funding. I'm gonna put it in the chat. I found that was very interesting how this funding was used to help fund Hudson Yard, but they use our community.
Oh, yes.
to get
Oh,
this.
yes.
Yeah, they did.
So when I read it, I was doing some research and I was just floored. I mean, really, this type of thing happens, and so let's make it work in our favor. If it's anything that the elected officials that's handling this or we should contact in order to get these funds put back to us because we are the people that that needs it. I think that's something that we should look at. On another note for new business, I live here near 127th Street and Fifth Avenue on this side of East Harlem, in the East Triangle. I don't know what's going on with the building that's at 1881 Park Avenue. There was a fire there. It used to be a program for drug rehabilitation, and the building it looks empty. I just want to know if anyone knew what was going on with that building. And since we need places for housing and a school, since we're not getting the 3 schools, that if there's anything that we can do to just check to see what's the condition or what's the status of that building, because it's a very large building. I don't know if I think it's part of the Department of Health building. I just needed to know how can we look into it to see if we can utilize it better than it maybe sitting there for too long of a time and not being used. And I'm going to just put the chat regarding in the chat the EB5 funding article that I just recently found. And that's it.
Hi, Angel. Thank you, Beverly. Hi, Angel. If you could just make a note of, you may know of that building and what may have happened, 1881 Park Avenue.
Yeah, it's the ARC building.
Okay.
ARC, exactly.
Yeah, I could look into it. I don't know what the current status of it is. I heard about a fire there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Angel. And so with that, I want to thank everyone. I'm glad the meeting was able to be held. I again will implore everyone, if you can make it on time to the meeting, please do so. This meeting was almost canceled. It was probably 5 minutes away from being canceled because not everyone was able to log into the meeting. I do understand that things come up, but even if you can call in so that your name is registered, that you are in and can just acknowledge your name during roll call, it can actually be the difference between a meeting happening and a meeting being called off. So for the next meeting, please make sure that you have the meeting information available and handy. So if you have to call in, I thank all of you for joining us and thank you for the lively chat and chatter and for all the knowledge that you've imparted. And with that, I'm going to ask Angel to do the roll call, and I would like to say good night to you all. Angel?
Okay. Committee members, when I call your name, please answer present. Devin was excused. Kenneth,
Present.
Jessica Elliott,
Present.
Jessica Morris,
Here.
Nilsa,
Here.
Beverly,
Here.
Vinny is absent. Jason, Candy,
Yeah.
you have quorum.
Okay. Again, thank you all, and I'll let Angel make any last comments, and then I will wish you all a good night. Angel, do you have any last comments?
Just to say that unless the mayor has a change of heart, next month's meeting will be in person.
So.
That's it.
Thank
Sleep on that
you.
one.
Have a good night.
All right. Good night, everybody.
And with that wonderful closing